Welcome to Driven by Dreamz. Today we're joined by a purpose-driven entrepreneur who's redefining what it means to lead with heart and strategy. Jami Shapiro is the founder of Silver Linings Transitions, a nationally accredited senior move management company and host of the Grandma Has ADHD podcast. Through her work, Jami blends business innovation with empathy, supporting seniors and families during major life transitions, while bringing attention to an often overlooked community, neurodivergent adults and seniors. As a certified senior advisor and ADHD coach, she's building a business that not only thrives, but truly serves. Let's dive in. Hi, Jami.
Hi.
Thank you so much for connecting with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really looking forward to learning more about your journey. So, could you share a bit about yourself?
So I've always been that person that was looking for the empty space to fill. Like I always knew that I wanted to do something, but I didn't necessarily know what that something was. So I went to college and I thought that I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I thought maybe I'd go to law school. I ended up in a career that had a trajectory and I kept making more money, and then I had my first child and I realized that I didn't want to go back to the day-to-day. I did not end up going to law school because again the career, the corporate ladder and the pay just kind of sucked me in. But when I had my first child, I realized that I needed some flexibility because I did not want to have to go back to full-time work. And I remember at the time I approached the company with another employee. We were both pregnant at the same time, and we wanted to work part-time and job share. This was back in 2001. And we were like, we don't need the benefits. We want to share a job. And at the time, corporate America was not open to job sharing. And so I ended up leaving that career and going into real estate, which I did for a little over 10 years. And while I was working as a realtor, which really wasn't what I had planned to do, but it was a way for me to work my own schedule, be home for my child. And then again, I fell into the money trap, but I got cancer. This was 20 years ago. And, when you are 34 and you get cancer, you really evaluate your life. And I realized that I was not on the path that I wanted to be on, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that it wasn't what I was doing. And then and I remember, have you ever looked for a word and you just couldn't find it? It's like on the tip of your tongue that you just can't. So that's how I felt about my career. Like I knew that I was going to do something, but I didn't know what that something was. And I don't believe in, I think things sort of happen the way they're meant to happen. Sort of like when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I discovered the senior move management industry. And they were having their national conference in San Diego right around the time that I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do, because I had moved from Florida, which I should add. I moved from Florida, given up my real estate career, and I was actually working at a cancer foundation. And but I then realized that wasn't going to pay me enough to be able to live in California with 3 children. So I discovered the senior move management industry, and it was the light bulb moment that you always hope to have. Like, wow, this is work that I actually could really be good at, and my career, points up until then have just really led to this being a natural fit. So I did that. I started the business with a partner, married, and then in the process of 1 year, my partner decided that she was going to go work for her husband, who had also started his own business. And at that point, we had no clients. And then shortly thereafter, my marriage of 15 years ended. So then I was facing a divorce and starting a business, which was huge. And then I started Silver Linings Transitions, and we are a San Diego-based company. We provide move management, specializing in seniors and home organization. And I know I'm going on, but I'm getting somewhere with that. And then what I found was that we had times where we were busier than other times, and that when we weren't busy, we were really doing a lot of organizing. When we weren't doing moves, because moves are very cyclical, They're just like when people are selling a house, they have to move, but we have times of the year that people really aren't selling their houses. And so I became a professional organizer, which is really funny because also after starting the business, I discovered that I had ADHD when my oldest child was diagnosed. And honestly, I didn't pay attention to that because, as I shared with you, I was starting a business and going through a divorce. And so that got put on the back burner. But as I became a professional organizer, I learned about the Institute for Challenging Disorganization because I was trying to find repeat business. Well, who needs organizers on a repeatable time frame? People who struggle with clutter. That they're just some people who just have a lot of clutter, and it just seems to find its way back. And I happen to be one of those people. And what I discovered is a lot of the clients that we had been working with actually had undiagnosed ADHD. And that's actually what led to me starting the Grandma Has ADHD podcast and ending up becoming an ADHD coach because I was learning about ADHD and I heard a podcast and they were talking about fibromyalgia and migraine headaches being very common for people with ADHD, and my mother had both. But because my mother could sit and read books for hours and she was very sedentary where I was like always moving, it never occurred to me that she had ADHD. Well, she did. The diagnosis was confirmed, and that has set me on another entrepreneurial journey.
That's amazing. Can you walk us through some of the challenges you faced when you started Silver Linings Transition? I mean, I know you mentioned that was a tough time for you, but were there any business-specific challenges that you struggled with?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, everyone who I said, this is what I'm going to be doing, was like, oh, that's a great idea. And then I thought, oh, we'd get business. And initially, this is when I had the partner, we sent a buy 1 hour, get 1 hour free, and crickets. I mean, honestly, it took more than a year to get a client from the time that I said this was what I was going to do to actually getting a client. But here is an interesting thing that happened. I did not have a contract in place. What I mean by that is I had no service agreement. And it wasn't until I finally had an opportunity to get a client that I put the service agreement into place. And it occurred to me, again, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I wasn't saying to the universe, I'm ready to receive this. I hadn't even put a contract into place to do business. So that was a big aha for me. And I would say the other big thing that was a challenge was funding. I was going through a divorce, as I mentioned, and I did not have anyone to co-sign a loan. And even when I looked into the loans, especially for women business owners, there wasn't funding unless I was really willing to lose a ton of percentages on one of those loans that was available. And so bootstrapping, which I understand is what a lot of women end up doing, because I think we tend to be a little more fearful about going out and borrowing money from people or getting investors. And so I bootstrapped it. And then also I didn't really have business experience. I was very fortunate to, along my journey, a couple years in, finding EOA, the Entrepreneur Organization Accelerator Group. But unfortunately, you couldn't even get into that group until you started a business that was doing at least $250,000 a year. Well, going from 0 to 250 is the hardest thing to do, I think. So those are some challenges.
It's great how you faced those. I mean, what kept you persevering through that time, that 1 year without clients? How did you keep going? How did you decide that I still want to do this?
That is where the purpose and the why comes in. I mean, Simon Sinek talks about the why all the time. If you don't know your why, you're going to have a really hard time, sticking with it. And I will tell you, I started Silver Linings Transitions, and we're running well. I mean, are we where I want us to be? No. But we're running well. We've got a really good reputation in San Diego. And we just celebrated 10 years in business, 10 years since we actually got a client. That's the difference, not how long it took me to get one. And then I really discovered that the intersection of seniors with ADHD is completely being ignored and has become a passion of mine because it makes such a difference when people understand the impact that ADHD has on their life at any age. And some people would say, why are you taking your eye off the ball of silver linings? That's your bread and butter. That's what's earning a paycheck. But I have a passion and a calling that is telling me I have to do this. And I think that that's really important in that entrepreneurial journey. You cannot just say, I want to make money. That is not a big enough why. It really has to be like, why me and why this?
Uh, a lot of people, I think, as you mentioned, don't even know they have ADHD like your mom, or they don't understand the importance of getting it diagnosed and facing it. So how do you help seniors with ADHD? How do you make sure they know the importance of it and that you get more clients that way?
That's a great question, actually. And I've had a lot of people say to me, they've lived all of these years, without knowing they have ADHD. Why does it even matter? And one of the things that I'm sure you know about doing a podcast is you get to meet so many people and you get to hear their stories. And I had a 67-year-old woman who I interviewed who was diagnosed at 57. And she said that she finally felt like she had permission to be herself. I jokingly say that when you have ADHD, like you kind of have like that freak flag flying, like, there's something different about you, but you don't know what it is. But I will say, like, one of the biggest things that I can share is a story about my mom and my relationship. So my mom has always had clutter. It's always been a source of contention between the two of us. I was, back when I graduated from college and I moved in with my mom, she had just gone through a divorce. And I had just graduated. We were living in a 2-bedroom apartment while I, got on my feet. And my mom's clutter really began to take a toll on our relationship. And at some point she said, I think you need to move out because it was just really causing friction between the two of us. And I did. And it's been an ongoing battle with my mom. And I hear this with a lot of clients too, where they have a parent that's got a lot of clutter, or sometimes I see it where we have like the parent and then we end up having the adult child who are both clients of ours because, I started to see the pattern because ADHD is very, very heritable. But with my mom, she's bright. She's super bright and super creative, but my mom didn't graduate from college because, and I never knew why, and she was constantly starting and stopping and starting and stopping. And I was getting frustrated with my mom. I was like, why do you always start these projects and then not finish them? And it's just sort of, she was unpredictable, and then she had social anxiety, and there was just a lot. So we just have had a lot of tension. And I'm actually in the process of writing a book right now, and it's really geared towards those seniors who have had clutter their whole lives and haven't really figured out why the organizing tools that they've worked, haven't worked, and why they just could never get it. And my mom, and I will say this about my generation, which is Gen X and beyond, technology is much more of a challenge for us because we are digital tourists, where you are a digital native. You've grown up with technology. It's new for us. And then when you're older, things even become harder to learn. And then throw in some ADHD, and that makes it really hard. Like I've actually learned in my ADHD coaching that a lot of people with ADHD struggle with technology because we don't want to take the time to read the manual. We want to plug it in and have it work. And so when it doesn't work, we lose patience and we didn't go about the steps the right way. So anyway, my mom and I are working off of Google Docs. I wasn't even thinking about the fact that my mom doesn't know how to use Google Docs. I know that she's really smart and articulate and she reads all the time. Old me would have gotten frustrated because I sent my mom a computer. I was ready to show her how to do it, set up the Zoom call. She couldn't even get the document. She couldn't even get the Zoom. You know what I mean? And old me would have gotten super frustrated with her, but I now have a compassion for her because I now understand she's not trying to be difficult. She's not trying. It's not a laziness on her part. It is her brain doesn't work. And people with ADHD, our brains, and I jokingly say, I interview brilliant women who can start businesses and do these amazing things, but then they have to have a recipe book that's 4 ingredients or less, because just to do something that doesn't interest our brains is so taxing, we can't do it. So I would say that just that understanding and that freedom to accept yourself for who you are and realize it was never that you were lazy or that you weren't competent. It's that ADHD is interest driven brain. And if you are interested by something, you can accomplish it, which is why so many entrepreneurs actually have ADHD. And if something doesn't interest you, then it's like paying taxes or completing forms or setting up computers harder.
That really puts things in perspective. And I mean, that's an amazing feeling to have, knowing that you actually belong. And it must feel awesome for you to help people feel that.
Yeah, and I think also there's a term that I learned. I'm also a certified senior advisor, so I help families when they have to make decisions to determine what's the right path, what should they be considering, what professionals should we bring in. And I learned in my studying a term called gerotranscendence, which if you're familiar with Erik Erikson and the life stages, we go from different stages in our life developmentally. So we go from infant stage to toddler stage to, right, all these different stages. Well, when he and his wife got into their 80s, they realized that we were missing a stage. And that's when, you are starting to look back on your life and evaluate your choices and repair your relationships and make peace with the life that you've lived. And if you have gone your whole life with undiagnosed ADHD, there are many things that go with ADHD. One of them is we're really critical of ourselves. And so we have a negative self-talk that's really detrimental to anybody that does that to themselves. Social anxiety is another really big thing that happens with when people have ADHD. Rejection sensitivity, so that we have a lot of problems in families because people perceive rejection when it isn't even there, and they can catastrophize situations. So having that understanding actually helps towards that acceptance of the life that you've lived. I know my mom, regretted that she never finished college because, again, she's super bright. And I think now we both have an understanding that when she said she couldn't focus, she couldn't focus. And so taking that shame away and just realizing, in fact, I think ADHD brains are brilliant. So I always tell people if I think you have ADHD and I'm like, oh, do you have ADHD? That's like the biggest compliment I can give you, because our brains, I love Ned Hallowell, who's a thought leader in the ADHD space. He says that having ADHD is like having a Ferrari brain and bicycle brakes. Like, you have to learn to craft it.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, it helps people understand ADHD better. So how do you balance profitability with purpose when when your business is so mission driven?
That's a good question, and I don't know that I really have a good answer, unfortunately. I would say that if you asked me where is my weakness, I would say it's probably in that spot. I find that I've run my business a lot more with my heart than with my head, and that's a good observation, and I struggle with that one, to be honest with you.
Okay, well, how do you approach transitions with not just a logistical process, but as an emotional one too, especially for seniors?
That's a really good question too. So again, I did have cancer, more than 20 years ago, and I lost a very close friend at the age of 40 to cancer. And I try to reframe where they are in their lives to just say, hey, whatever life has thrown at you, you have conquered it. And you should feel proud of yourself. And I go back to uncertainty because, think about COVID, when we were all living in an uncertain time and we saw the mental health crisis just, go through the roof. And that's because as a society, we don't like uncertainty. So I sort of am like, what? It's normal that you would not feel comfortable in uncertainty. So let's look at the things that you want for your life. And let's look at the things that you can do for your life. And I would say a gift of ADHD. And by the way, we work with anyone, not just seniors, not just people with ADHD. Those are just the areas that we specialize in. But what I would say about one of the blessings of ADHD is our natural curiosity, and curiosity is really critical in times of transition. So rather than being fearful, what can I look forward to? What's this going to be like? Approaching it with curiosity.
Well, you work in a field that involves a lot of emotional labor, so how do you stay grounded and energized?
I think self-care is really important. I have done exercise is a priority for me. That's also one of the things that I've learned about in ADHD. It's super helpful, but it's helpful for anybody. So when I'm really stressed out, I will go outside and take a hike. I've learned the hard way that I have to honor that work-life balance. I have to create boundaries, because if I don't, it spills over, and then I'm not a good person. And then I would say the other big thing that I learned was to watch my energy. So what I mean by that is, if something lights me up and it feels good for me, then that's where I should go. And if something feels really heavy, then I look at maybe that's something that I shouldn't be doing. Or, there's also another thing that I learned, again, in the EOA organization, which was there are 4 quadrants. One is I like it and I'm good at it. One is I'm good at it but I don't like it. One of them is I don't like it and I'm not good at it, right? And then one is I can't remember. But anyway, you kind of get where I'm going with that. So we need to stay in the quadrant of I like it and I'm good at it. And then anything that I don't like and I'm not good at, that needs to go to somebody else so it doesn't drain our energy.
Well, thank you for explaining that. I mean, I think work-life balance is important for all entrepreneurs, but sometimes it's just neglected, right? When you get really absorbed into something, maybe something you really enjoy, or maybe something that's draining, you kind of forget that to take a step back and take care of yourself first.
And I actually heard, and I shouldn't say balance, I heard work-life integration. That we really need to think of, especially the way that society runs now, is, so maybe I get up usually at 5 in the morning, I will start working on my book, and then maybe I'll step out in the middle of the day to go exercise. So that's not necessarily balance, but that's integration. Or actually, I started a networking group. So I don't like going to the networking events where everybody hands their business cards out and shakes hands, and I hate it. So I started what's called networking. So the first Friday of every month, we meet at Torrey Pines and we hike. And if we do business, that's great. It's like killing 2 birds with one stone. So again, just really figuring out how I can integrate my business and my personal life.
What do you wish more entrepreneurs understood about working with vulnerable or underserved populations?
I think it's really important that we come from a place of empathy where we can put ourselves in another person's shoes and slow down and pause. And that's been even hard for me. And I think that this example with my mom, like I said, a year ago, I would have lost patience with my mom not being able to figure out how to use Google or get on the computer. And now I'm like, I know she really wants to do this for me, and I know if she could, she would. And so stepping back.
Well, thank you for sharing that. What's been the biggest lesson that entrepreneurship has taught you about yourself?
Oh, great. I would say nothing needs to be forced. That what is meant for you will find you. And probably the best business book that I ever read was Michael Singer's The Surrender Experiment. I highly, highly recommend it. And he talks about, just if the door opens, that's your door. And if it doesn't, then it isn't. And so, you don't need to force a client. You don't need to force an employee. Just letting go of feeling like I have to control everything.
How do you tell the difference between not forcing something, but also managing to work hard until that opportunity is there? If that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, it does. And I will say that a good example of that is, this ADHD and seniors thing that I am building, where I'm being told, that's taking your eye off the ball. But I feel so driven by it. And I haven't had any doors closed, by the way. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm getting, booked to speak nationally. I'm just not monetizing it yet. So I would just say that, again, leaning into what feels right. And it's like, really, I really believe in the gut. I really believe in intuition. And we know, when something doesn't feel right and you're forcing it, you just know. Like you've got to pay attention to that your body and that somatics.
Well, Jamie, I think this is a good place to start wrapping this up. So, do you have any final pieces of advice?
I have to say, I'm blown away by your questions, and I think that what you're doing is amazing. Yeah, I mean, I would love it if your listeners would tune in to the Grandma Has ADHD podcast to learn more and understand why, with all of the talk. And you could go onto the newsstands and you can see magazines and TikTok videos all over the place all about ADHD, but no one is talking about the fact that it exists in seniors and why it matters. And then I would also just say one more thing. This isn't necessarily for entrepreneurs, it's just for our society, and that is that we're so geared on anti-aging, and we need to really reframe how we think about that, and really we need to honor aging and realize that we're lucky if we get to age, and I can say that as a cancer survivor.
Well, thank you so much, Jamie, for being here and sharing your incredible story.
Thank you so much for having me.